Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearlie Brewer, and I will be your host. Today's podcast guest is Tim Petersen, President and CEO of WorkSafeNB. Welcome, Tim. Glad to have you on our podcast.
Well, Pearlie, I appreciate the invitation and look forward to sharing more about the story of performance refunds at WorkSafe New Brunswick.
Yeah, this past December, WorkSafeNB gave out $180 million in performance refunds. Certainly a rarity, to say the least, Tim. What we'd like today, I guess, from you during our podcast is to provide some context as to how this came about and talk about some of your plans going ahead as well. So I assume it's pretty safe to say that this is the first time this has ever happened in the history of WorkSafe.
Yeah, Pearlie, you're right about that. This is the first time that we've ever issued performance refunds, and the magnitude of the refunds, as you know, at $180.6 million is quite significant, and I think provides a boost to employers and to the New Brunswick economy at a time when it's desperately needed. I would add that the concept of a performance refund, I think, certainly would be something that would have been incomprehensible even just a few years ago. So definitely a historic event. And I know you mentioned that WorkSafe was able to give out $180 million in performance refunds. I would just say, and this will be more to come throughout our discussion here this morning, but it's more about workplaces in the province having earned the refund. And I just look forward to providing some more context to what I mean by that.
So from a point of view of dollars that actually companies receive back, I assume obviously it varies a lot depending on the size of the company and so on, but what sort of range would it have been? I assume for larger companies it was a very significant amount.
Yeah, for sure. So I do have some numbers in there in terms of the magnitude. So there were 289 companies that received a refund greater than $100,000, greater than $100,000. And there were double-digit count numbers that received in excess of $1 million in refunds. And then if you look at some, I guess a little lesser magnitude, but still quite significant, over 2,000 employers received between $10,000 and $100,000. And more than 4,400 employers received between $2,500 and $10,000. So the magnitude of the dollars that we're talking about, certainly in total, but even on an individual employer basis, are quite astounding, really.
Yeah, when you look at the amount of money that you gave back, I would think that a lot of employers during pretty tough economic times.
Did I lose you guys?
Can you hear me now, Tim?
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me, Tim? Hello?
I can hear everybody fine.
Yep, I can see and hear you too, but I think we've lost Tim, so we'll see if we can get him logged back on here now. Yeah, Mark, let's leave the recording going, and it'd be easier to edit that out. So we'll see if we can get him back on here again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes,
we can hear you.
Can you hear me, Bill or Tim?
Yeah. I can hear you, but I lost you for a little bit.
Okay. So let's pick it up here then. And if you have any further problems, let me know. So Tim, when you look at the amount of money that you just talked about, that must have been very well received, during pretty tough economic times here in the province. And, come the end of the year, to get some good news is always more than welcome. Why don't you get into a little bit of the background as to how this came about?
Yeah, certainly happy to do that, Hurley. So the performance refunds really is at the end of the day, it's driven by the fact that we find ourselves in a very favorable financial position. So at the end of 2023, we're actually 156.1% funded. So, and that's been a significant improvement. If you just go back to as recently as 2018, we were only 85% funded. Now, the reasons for achieving that significant increase in our financial position, really, the underlying things that drive that are accident costs, as you would expect. So, the number of accidents occurring and the severity of those accidents is one key driver. And the other is our investment portfolio. So we collect money from employers every year to cover the costs of that year's accidents. And because we're not paying all that money out in that year, we invest it. So, and we have a portfolio that is expected to return just over 6% annually. And it's been outperforming that expectation over the past few years, and in some years quite significantly. So when the two key drivers in your system are working in the right direction, so better investment returns than expected and lower injury costs than expected, then you would expect that your financial position is going to improve, and in some cases improve quite significantly. So I would take this opportunity, and I will take more opportunities, but to say kudos to New Brunswick workplaces for that reduction in severe injury frequency. And those two factors are really what is driving the financial position and the ability for us to issue a performance refund. So when I talk about funding levels, our board has set a target funding level range, which is between 115 and 125% funded. So when we get above that funding range, right, we're at 156%, and the upper end of the board's range is 125. We have had measures in place to kind of draw that funding down back towards the target. And historically, Pearly, what we've done is we've done that through the assessment rate. So you'll see, and since 2018, the rates come down from $2.65 to $1.10 actually for 2025. But the challenge that we had is that at 156% funded, it's really not possible to make any meaningful drawdown through a rebate in the assessment rate, right? A penny on the rate is about $1.4 million. And we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. So we knew that given our very high funding level, we were going to have to consider alternatives to a reduction in the assessment rate. So we started that discussion last year with the board, and we've had that discussion throughout the year last year, ultimately arriving at a conclusion on a new policy at the September board meeting. And when we were considering different alternatives, we sat at the table and we asked ourselves a very simple question. How did we get here? How did we come to be 156% funded? And reflected on all those things I just talked about, better than expected performance investment-wise and injury and severe injury-wise. So what dawned on us is that we got to where we're at because of better than expected performance. And that's really when we started thinking about the notion of performance refunds. And if workplaces out there have exceeded expectations, then why not give consideration to recognizing those efforts with a refund of the premiums that they paid? And that's really how we arrived at at the notion of performance refunds. We had a great series of discussions at the board level, and I commend the board because, as I said, just a few years ago, I think the notion of performance refunds would have been incomprehensible, and now it represents really fundamental and philosophical change in the way that we do business. And in addition to kudos to all the workplaces out there, I want to send the same the way of my board of directors, because we can honestly say I've been around WorkSafe for a long time. Just celebrated my 30 years at WorkSafe New Brunswick, and very confident in saying we have the strongest board here now that we've ever had. And that's a big part of how we got into this kind of fundamental and philosophical and historic change with respect to performance refunds.
So from the point of view of performance refund, did you issue that during a fiscal year or at the end?
The performance refunds were issued at the end of the year. So
Okay.
just to give you a little bit of maybe context in terms of how the rate setting process works. So we go to the board and engage in a discussion, usually at the end of September. There's a board meeting at the end of September, and that's typically when the board will set the assessment rate for the following year.
Okay.
And in addition to that, may give consideration to like looking at the policy changes. And we'd actually done an asset liability study last year that gave rise to consideration of different funding policies. And so it was through those discussions that the board actually arrived at a new funding policy. And effectively what it says is at that time when we go to set rates, we'll consider what our funding level is. And if the funding level is above 140%, then the board may give consideration to issuing performance refunds. So all of those discussions kind of came to a head at the September board meeting. And that's when the board made the decision to refund the entirety of the excess above 140%. And that's where the $180 million came from. That's the difference between, effectively, the dollar difference between 140% and 156% is the $180 million.
Okay.
And then once we established that and the board approved that, what we did was simply we allocated it to employers based on their like proportion of premiums paid in the previous year. So we looked at how much did you pay us in 2023? What did that represent as a percentage of the overall premiums we collected? And that's how we calculated what you would get back. So just for ease of illustration, like if what you paid us in 2023 represented 10% of overall premiums, you would have gotten back 10% of the 180 million.
Okay. Now, how will this affect your future assessment rates for 2025 and potential for any refund in that year?
Yeah. So I'm really proud of the fact that in addition to the performance refunds, we're actually announced a further rate reduction for 2025. So last year we were at $1.18. This year we announced a rate of $1.10, the lowest rate in the history of WorkSafe New Brunswick. And I might add to that last year we also, as you know, were able to improve benefits for workers. But to answer your question, the fact that we issued this performance refund, it won't have any impact in terms of future assessment rates because it only triggers above 140%. And so we're still well above the board's target range. So there's no expectation that the issuance of that $180 million will have an adverse effect on future assessment rates.
So the reaction to the refund, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, obviously anyone that gets money back, as you mentioned, is certainly going to be happy about it. You've asked for feedback from the employer on how they spent the refund. Have you received any feedback, or what overall have you received for feedback?
Yeah, I do. I have received feedback. And just back to the notion of the reaction, I would say that it was like there was a wide range of emotions, mostly surprise, and excitement and appreciation. Some disbelief though, and I can even say that, when we contacted employers, there was even, sometimes some suspicion that this was somehow part of a hoax, right? That there was just that level of disbelief that this could actually be happening. And as you mentioned, just like appreciation, because it comes at a time when many businesses are struggling. So, if I might just, I've got a couple of quick, just little stories that kind of illustrate some of those emotions. So, this, performance refunds and issuing them out, all kind of coincided with the postal disruption. So we were challenged with, in fact, how are we going to distribute checks back to employers? Anyway, long story short, our friends at Service New Brunswick very graciously offered to help us out. And part of the solution was we set up distribution centers at SNB locations throughout the province. And very appreciative of the fact that our colleagues there offered to help us out in that fashion. So that we did that, and I had occasion to visit one of those distribution centers and actually witness employers coming in and picking up their checks. And I can tell you, I saw firsthand, the surprise and just the gratitude that employers were showing. The other little story I have is just kind of illustrates that I don't think employers really fully appreciated the magnitude of what was about to happen. Even if they understood performance refunds, I don't think they understood just how big this was. I was in a conversation with an employer at an event after the refunds had been announced, but before they went out. And he was very appreciative. And I said, "Oh, do you have some sense of how much your performance refund will be?" He said, "No, I don't really." I said, "Well, do you know how much you paid in premiums in 2023? And he said, "Yeah, I think we paid about $150,000. I said, "Well, your performance refund will be about that plus 10%. And he was just blown away by it. Couldn't believe that, the magnitude. But the best part of that story is I followed up afterwards, because of that conversation, just to confirm, in fact, that company was going to get back $150,000. Well, what I found out is that they're actually getting back over $1 million. So, the individual I was talking to didn't really understand how much they had paid in. And then they in fact got a check for over $1 million. So just, as I said, kind of illustrates the sort of, surprise and appreciation. And then the feedback that I got, about what are employers doing with these performance refunds. And I can tell you, I'll use one example. I'll use WorkSafe New Brunswick as an example. We're an assessed employer, so we ourselves are getting back a performance refund. And what we're doing is we are soliciting ideas for investments in health and safety initiatives from our staff. And we're actually going to kind of do a little bit of a Dragon's Den WorkSafe New Brunswick style and have our employees come in and pitch ideas for what they think would be meaningful investments in health and safety. And we're going to commit funds to one or more of those initiatives. Some of the things I've heard from other employers, though, are that many doing the same, reinvesting the money in health and safety, But I've also actually had a couple of examples where employers are actually giving a portion of the funds back directly to employees to recognize and reward their commitment to a healthy and safe workplace. So really fantastic stories coming out of this.
Now, I know you're still putting your numbers together for 2024. Any indication at this point as to how they look from the point of view of especially accident rates?
Yeah, so I expect that our results are going to be very positive again in 2024. We're very early on. Our auditors haven't even knocked at the door yet, so it's way too early to establish exactly what those numbers would be. But I'm very confident that we will be reporting back out on positive results and a very positive financial position at the end of 2024. And of course, Pearlie, that'll feed into the rate setting discussions that we'll have with the board in September.
So let's get into a little more detail. What changes have you as an organization made in both the prevention end and the rehabilitation compensation sides of the house that really enabled you to see the decline in accident rates in the province? I'm sure a lot of folks are kind of wondering what's brought this about. It doesn't just happen by magic.
Yeah, I would say, like, what changes haven't we made? We've made a lot. I thought, well, there's a long list, far too long to get into detail on all of them, certainly in a short amount of time. But there were a few things that I did want to highlight, both from a prevention and from rehabilitation and return to work perspective, because both are exceptionally important. On the prevention side, Pearlie, I would say really what the key change has been a focus on being a partner in prevention. And we are responsible for the enforcement of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations. And we have a number of health and safety officers that have that responsibility. But when we need to use those tools, we use them. But we start off from the perspective of a partner in prevention and a very collaborative approach, even to the point that we have, when new employers register, we have what we call a handshake meeting with the employer. And we'll have our health and safety people go in and just say, hey, introduce themselves, WorkSafe New Brunswick. We want to work with you. We want to be your partner. We have lots of knowledge that can help you, right, create a culture of health and safety in your workplace. And if you do that, we all win. So I think that is probably the biggest thing from a prevention standpoint. The other thing, though, that we're doing, and this is maturing, I would say it matures, every, if not on a month-by-month basis, on a week-by-week basis, certainly annually, is that we're really focused on more targeted prevention activities, and we're using predictive analytics more. So really, what are those factors that we can identify that are going to help us, right? We have a lot of data. How do we best use that data to make sure that we're getting into workplaces before injuries occur? So how do we determine what workplaces or what industries are at risk? And let's get in early and work with them before the injuries occur. So those are a couple of examples of fundamental things that we're doing a bit differently on the prevention side. Now, we do have injuries occur. There's no doubt about it. It continues. The trends are going in the right direction, but the numbers are still higher than we would like them to be. Last year, I think, or on average, the last few years, around 3,400 lost time claims. So still lots of work to be done there. What we're doing, I think, on the rehab and return to work side, quite a few different things, but one of the key things is early intervention. And early intervention, both from like trying to get a proper diagnosis and a proper rehab and return to work plan in place, and early intervention to really try and keep employees at work where at all possible. And not just thinking about, well, can you do the work you were doing before? No, can we keep you at work and connected to the workplace through some form of accommodation? And what we found is that, workplaces, again, are willing to work with us to make that happen. So what we're seeing is those things are paying off in the form really of declining claim durations. And declining claim durations has a direct impact on costs and financial position. And the other thing is, well, the fact of the matter is workplaces are experiencing, as a result of all of this and the efforts that they're putting in, they're experiencing far fewer severe injuries. And when they do occur, all of the partners involved are doing a better job of getting people back to work.
So accident rates in New Brunswick are down, the lowest in Canada. Certainly a good opportunity here to congratulate WorkSafeNB staff and to the province's employers on achieving that. Do you get calls from some of your counterparts across Canada saying, hey, look, Tim, you guys are obviously doing something right here. What kinds of things that, you feel have really worked for you? What kinds of advice are you sharing with other jurisdictions?
Yep. So we do. I do get those questions. We meet regularly with our counterparts across the country to share many different things. What's going right? What are our challenges? When I reflect, when they ask me, I reflect on some of the things that I just reflected on, like what are some of these things that we're doing differently. And at the end of the day, Pearlie, I would just say, like, our commitment, we have a commitment to really to being in the right place at the right time with the right service and doing so in a very collaborative fashion. So that to me is the driving force, and that's the conversation I have when my counterparts ask me what we're doing differently. And the other thing is, I know we all want to put COVID behind us from many different perspectives, but there were a few positive things that came out of COVID, and one of them was like a renewed focus on health and safety. And I think that we're still experiencing that workplaces have taken that renewed focus and they've maintained it. So I'm really, really pleased about that. But then when I talk to my counterparts, I do talk a lot about what we're doing in our claims division with early intervention and what a great job the teams are doing at returning people to work, and in many cases, keeping people at work through accommodation, where in the past, that simply wouldn't have happened. And each day that goes by when you have a disconnection from work, the likelihood of getting back to work diminishes a little bit. So maintaining that connection with the workplace, it's critical, and our folks are doing a great job of that.
So, Tim, are there any nights where you lay awake a little bit and worry and ask yourself, look, we've achieved such a good level. No, we want it to go lower, but we really have achieved such a good level and it's low and we seem to be keeping it there. How can we continue to keep it there? You must have moments where you say, well, gee, we need to be doing whatever to keep it there.
Yeah, I would say, like, when you say what keeps you up at night, we still have we still have too many people getting killed on the job. That's what keeps me up at night. That, we've been consistently in double-digit fatalities in New Brunswick. Some years we've seen improvement, and then some years we've taken a step back. But until we get to a point of having no fatalities in the province, I can tell you that will be something that definitely keeps me up, because the impact is really incomprehensible for those of us who have been lucky enough to not experience it on a personal level.
Where do you see the biggest pressure points coming in the next year to 3 years even? Do you see any points that you're sort of, oh boy, we're going to have to watch this, or this could derail us? For example, occupational health issues.
100%. I don't want to, I would not say derail. I wouldn't want to scare anyone by saying derail us, because we recognize we've identified the challenge. The biggest one, Pearly, in my opinion, unquestionably, is psychological injuries. We're seeing decreases in most other injury types, but we're seeing an increase in psychological injuries. And we're seeing other jurisdictions are actually expanding coverage of psychological injuries through their legislation, something that we're likely to be discussing in New Brunswick at some point. But that really is, to me, that's going to be the challenge. Psychological injuries are they're very challenging. The good news is, and this may seem a little like a little bit of a contradictory statement, but there is some good news in the fact that we're seeing increased reporting of psychological injuries. And the good news is that it's becoming, and I know this like from being directly engaged with several groups, including firefighters. It's becoming acceptable, not just acceptable, but it's becoming an expectation that people talk about psychological injury. Whereas in the past, people may shy away from talking about it. And the firefighters are a great example of that, because they're a proud, tough group of individuals. And, if you go back, I'm going to say as recently as a decade ago, I'm sure firefighters who were, many of whom experienced psychological injury, would not be comfortable talking about it. In fact, they'd be entirely uncomfortable talking about it. Now they're creating peer support groups to engage in discussions about it and encourage discussions about it. So it is a challenge, but the good news is, well, people are willing to talk about it, and the courage to talk about it means that we can identify a treatment program and support mechanisms early on, back to that early intervention. And early intervention is extremely important in the case of psychological injuries. So it's a challenge. It's a pressure point, but we've identified it and we're developing a strategy. And we learn also as other jurisdictions learn from us. We learn from them. And I would just finish by saying it's probably the biggest challenge for every jurisdiction across the country.
How do you go about to manage from a workers' compensation point of view that topic?
Psychological injuries. Well, one very innovative thing that we've done here in New Brunswick is we've introduced what's referred to as the 6C program. The 6C program is specific to psychological injuries, and it's a multi-week, I think it's a 6-week program. And what we've done here, and the really kind of unique part of it is, as soon as we get a report of psychological injury, we don't even wait for a decision to be made on the claim. We refer the client to the Succeed program immediately. And our expectation and experience is that, the benefit of getting people into the program early far exceeds any cost that may be associated with, like, subsequently, if you made a decision to deny a claim, but the worker had still received support through the Succeed program. The cost of that are minimal in comparison to the gains that we get by having people in that program early. And that's something that's unique. That's unique to New Brunswick. And that would be another thing. I didn't mention it when you say, like, well, when your counterparts ask you what you're doing differently, what do you talk about? The Succeed program is definitely something we talk about.
Now, are there any other jurisdictions in Canada that already accept psychological claims?
Oh yes, most all jurisdictions accept some form of psychological claim. So in New Brunswick, it's psychological injuries like arising out of a traumatic, like for us, it's defined as an acute reaction to a traumatic event. So it's, kind of, if I refer back to like firefighters, so firefighters attending at the scene of a fire, well, they may be witness to some pretty horrific things, and that could cause some form of psychological injury. That would be the type of thing that we cover here in New Brunswick. That would be covered in, I believe, pretty much every other jurisdiction as well. Now, there are some other jurisdictions that go beyond that, and they talk more about not just an acute reaction, but like a gradual buildup of things that create some form of psychological injury. So it's not just witnessing or being party to a single event. It's more about things, building up over time. So there are a few jurisdictions that cover those things in varying degrees. Like the scope of coverage is a little bit different in every jurisdiction. But it's an ongoing conversation here at WorkSafe New Brunswick, not just about what are we going to do to support people who have claims with WorkSafe New Brunswick, but we're going to look at the scope of coverage in other jurisdictions and consider whether or not there's a need for change here in New Brunswick from a legislative perspective.
So at some point, Tim, we'd certainly like to have someone on our podcast to talk about your 6-week psychological program.
Oh yes, for sure. There are several people who would be very eager to share more about that program.
It's certainly a hot topic. Pretty much every conference you go to nowadays, pretty much every time you go on the internet or LinkedIn, whatever, that's certainly being identified as a topic. Look, Tim, I know your time is valuable, but while we have you here, one last question. 2025, I know guys have a lot on the go in 2025. Use this opportunity. Anything you'd like to promote?
There are a few things actually that I'd like to promote. So I mentioned earlier in 2024 we were able to achieve legislative change improving benefits for workers. So that was phase one. So that was the loss of earnings increasing from 85 to 90% and the increase in the maximum annual insurable earnings. That was kind of part one of a suite of benefit improvement changes. So I'm looking forward to 2025 in furthering phase two of those benefit improvements and hoping that I will be invited to Fredericton to discuss those and advance those changes in the first half of 2025. We're continuing to work on, we've done a large consultation with respect to firefighter coverage, most specifically presumptive coverage for cancer. So that's an ongoing dialogue with the board that will look to get some conclusion and recommendations around that in 2025. We're working on a long-term strategy for psychological injuries. So I talked about, the S3E program and things we're doing to support workers who suffer such injuries. But we're also looking at, that's kind of after the injuries occurred. We're also looking, though, at a strategy around preventing psychological injuries and what can we do to help workplaces avoid having people in situations where these type of injuries might occur. We're also looking from a prevention and awareness perspective, a strategy for newcomers to the province, right? So we know that even a basic understanding of occupational health and safety would be extremely valuable for folks. So we're kind of strategy to make that kind of make sense and be digestible for folks who are maybe newcomers to the province and maybe newcomers to the entire concept of health and safety in the workplace. And then I guess the other thing I would say from a prevention perspective is we're looking at potentially partnering with folks for maybe new safety associations in the province. So currently we have dedicated safety associations for the construction industry, for forestry, and for continuing care. But there are other industries in the province that could potentially benefit from safety associations. So those will be very interesting conversations that I look forward to. And the final thing I would mention is we're always trying to improve services that we offer to our clients, to the employers and workers of the province. And part of offering really good, effective, and efficient services, having the right systems in place to enable that. And we're doing a complete overhaul of all of our systems here at WorkSafe. And in 2025, I look forward to we're implementing a new finance and HR system, but we're also going to be in the market for a new claims and employer system. And that's going to be, those tools will be reflective and enable a service that people would expect in 2025. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that evolve. And the last thing I would say is, just with respect to performance refunds, I know folks listening to the podcast, there's a lot, you hear a lot of information here. There's a lot to digest. I would just let you know that we have an FAQ available specifically on performance refunds on our website. So in addition to what you've heard on the podcast today, there may be many other questions that you have, and I'm certain that a majority of them would be addressed in that FAQ. So I just point you in that direction. And as always, Pearlie, just appreciate the opportunity to come on your podcast and be given a forum to kind of talk about some of the interesting things happening at WorkSafe New Brunswick. Appreciate it very much.
I guess the last quick question, the last few days, with all the discussion with the new U.S. President Donald Trump, an idea that's certainly floated the last few days is for the provinces to do what they can to try and break down any interprovincial barriers to trade between all the different provinces. Do you sense any discussion will come up on health and safety relative to any complications that might have or any difficulty relative to health and safety or not?
Well, I would say from a health and safety perspective, we are continually involved in discussions with our counterparts. So we're part of national groups that talk about a lot about emerging issues, and that would be one of them, certainly. So we are here at WorkSafe. I'd like to talk to the team about one WorkSafe New Brunswick. We're all in this together, and and in it for, we have a unified vision, but it's really like one Canada from that perspective. And we're always involved in those discussions. So I would say folks take comfort in the fact that we're actively engaged in those discussions, and we're actively engaged from a health and safety requirement perspective in removing barriers to doing business across Canadian jurisdictions. So I would say that those conversations will just strengthen in light of the circumstances we find ourselves in.
Well, look, Tim, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. We certainly appreciate it. And to our listeners out there, stay safe. We will see you next week.